My name is Kennel. In 2021, when I was 17, I lived with my parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the streets are calm. The houses all look the same, and nothing ever really happens. Until that night. It was a rainy Saturday. My parents had gone a few streets over to a neighbor's house to play chess. They loved those long, slow games, but sitting around listening to adults argue about pawns wasn't my idea of a good time. I told them I'd stay home. My plan was simple: snacks and a horror movie. I put on No One Gets Out Alive, dimmed the lights, and by 9:30 p.m. I was stretched out on the couch. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, adding to the atmosphere. About halfway through the movie, a sound made me pause it. Something outside. At first I blamed the storm, but it kept going. A faint, persistent noise that put me on edge. Don't be weird, Kennel, I told myself. Just the weather. Then at exactly 10 o'clock p.m. a loud bang echoed through the house. Not thunder, the front door. My heart kicked into overdrive. Who would be knocking in this weather at this hour? I crept to the door, careful not to make noise, and looked through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch. Early 30s, soaked rain jacket clinging to her, hair dripping, face pale and desperate. "Please," she called, her voice thin under the pounding rain. "I need help. My car broke down and my phone's dead. Can I use yours to call someone?" I hesitated, pulse thudding in my ears. Under the streetlight, I could see her car at the curb. The engine was still running. That didn't make sense. If the car had died, why was it on? I squinted through the peephole, trying to rationalize it. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. She stood there shivering. "Thank you," she said, stepping forward. I moved aside and saw him. A man in a black hoodie was sprinting toward the house from the darkness. His face was partially hidden. In his hand, unmistakable even in the rain, was a gun. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut before the woman could cross the threshold. I twisted the deadbolt and threw the chain back on. She screamed and started pounding on the door. "Let me in, you don't understand." The man reached the porch, his fist joining hers, shaking the frame. "Open up," he roared, his voice a mix of fury and panic. I stumbled backward, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Then, from the back of the house, came the sharp crash of breaking glass. I sucked in a breath and ran to the kitchen. The back window was shattered, glass glittering on the floor. The man was halfway through the opening, one leg inside, rain dripping off his clothes. Without thinking, I grabbed the heaviest frying pan I could reach and swung. He jerked back just in time, but his hand raked against the jagged glass. Blood smeared across the frame. He cursed and withdrew, disappearing into the darkness outside. Shaking, I bolted back to the living room and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, voice trembling as I explained what was happening. The operator told me officers were on their way and to stay on the line. The pounding on the front door grew louder. The woman's voice sounded more frantic than ever. "You don't understand. Please let us in." I didn't answer. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and clutched my phone like it was the only thing tying me to safety. I texted my parents, telling them not to come home. My dad replied immediately. He'd called the neighbors for help too. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The operator kept talking, trying to keep me calm. Then suddenly everything went silent. No banging, no voices, no glass. I held my breath, straining to hear. Footsteps overhead. My stomach dropped. The attic window, I hadn't even thought about it. Had they climbed onto the roof? The footsteps moved across the ceiling toward the top of the stairs. At the same time, the distant sound of sirens grew closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the frosted bathroom window. A loud knock on the bathroom door made me jump. "Police!" I froze. For a moment I wasn't sure if I could trust it. Then I heard more voices downstairs, radios crackling, commands being called. Gathering every bit of courage I had, I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Officers were in the hallway and moving through the rooms, flashlights cutting through the shadows. "It's clear," one of them called, but his tone didn't make me feel any safer. The attic window was open, but the intruders were gone. They took my statement while other officers combed the neighborhood. My parents burst through the front door minutes later, both of them pale. My dad hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "We're not leaving you alone again," he said. Later, the police found the woman's car abandoned a few streets away. It was stolen. Inside, they discovered duct tape, zip ties, and a knife. The blood on our window frame linked the man to several other home invasions in the area. The woman and the man were never caught. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, replaying it over and over, imagining what might have happened if I'd opened that door just a little wider and let them in. That thought still makes my stomach turn. This next story happened in 2017 on Christmas Day when I was still a teenager. We were hosting a big family gathering at our house. First, second, and even third cousins were coming. I was excited. It had been 3 years since I'd seen a lot of them. It felt like the perfect time to reconnect. Relatives arrived between 11:30 and 1 o'clock. The house filled with greetings, laughter, and the smell of food. The dining table quickly disappeared under all the dishes everyone brought. My dad's cousin Lester came too. He brought a fruit salad and a cheerful attitude, but there was something about him I couldn't quite place. I'd never met him before. He lived in California and we were on the East Coast, so I figured I just wasn't used to his personality. Still, something felt off. Lunch was served around 2:30. We all sat down, talked, and caught up on each other's lives. It was loud, chaotic, and genuinely nice. Afterward, we took our plates to the kitchen. While I was helping clean up, my phone vibrated. It was my best friend Elsa calling. I slipped away to my room for some privacy. We talked for about 15 minutes, Christmas plans, what we got as gifts, normal stuff. I hung up, stretched, and was about to go back to the party when there was a knock at my door. It was Lester. I was surprised. We hadn't really talked one-on-one. Still, I told him to come in. He stepped into my room, looking around like he was memorizing everything. "Hey there," he said. "How's school?" I told him it was good, that I was enjoying my freshman year of high school. He asked a few harmless questions about my classes and teachers. Then he said something that made my skin prickle. "You ever notice anything unusual in this house?" I frowned. "Unusual how?" He tilted his head and smiled in a way that made me uneasy. "Oh, I don't know. Sometimes old houses have their secrets." I told him I hadn't noticed anything. He nodded, muttered something I couldn't catch, and left the room. The weird feeling lingered. As afternoon turned into evening, we gathered in the living room to open presents. The room was bright and noisy, everyone laughing and chatting. Lester sat off to the side, staring out the window. Outside, it was pitch dark. The only thing you could see was the faint outline of the trees in our backyard. There wasn't much of a view. "Everything okay?" I asked. He smiled without looking at me. "Oh, I'm fine, just enjoying the view." His behavior only got stranger as the night went on. He wandered through the house, pausing to stare at random things. The family photos, the old clock in the hallway, the door to the basement. At one point, I caught him standing by the basement door, just staring. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned quickly. "Oh, nothing. Just curious. Curious about our basement. It was unfinished, full of boxes and old junk. Nothing worth staring at." Around 9 p.m., most of the family decided to head home. After a wave of hugs and thank yous, it was just my immediate family and Lester. Since it was late, my parents invited him to stay the night instead of driving to his hotel. I didn't like the idea, but I kept quiet. Later, I was in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard a floorboard creak downstairs. It sounded like someone walking around. I assumed it was my dad checking the doors, or maybe Lester getting a drink. Then I heard the basement door open. Faint footsteps descended the stairs. Curiosity won out over caution. I slipped out of my room and peeked down the hall. The basement light was on, casting a yellow glow up the stairwell. Quietly, I stepped to the top of the stairs and looked down. Lester stood in the middle of the basement, holding a flashlight, examining something on the floor. "Lester," I called. He jumped and snapped the flashlight off. "Oh, hi," he said, voice a little too casual. Couldn't sleep, thought I'd look around. You know, basements are fascinating. Fascinating was not the word I'd use. Our basement was all dust, shelves, boxes, and cobwebs. I just stared at him. He gave me a nervous smile and walked up the stairs, brushing past me without another word. The next morning, Lester was gone. My parents said he'd left early to catch his flight. Something about it didn't sit right. I went down to the basement. Near the back wall, one of the floorboards had been pried loose. Inside the gap was a small, dusty box. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were old letters and photographs, some dated in the 1940s. They were from the previous owners of the house. Nothing strange, just family photos and correspondence. But why had Lester been so interested in them? Why sneak around in the middle of the night and then leave without saying goodbye? When I showed the box to my parents, they were just as confused as I was. To this day, I still don't know what he was looking for or what he expected to find down there. That Christmas sticks with me, not because of the gifts or the food, but because of Uncle Lester and the mystery he seemed to be chasing in our basement. Before the next story, if you're hearing these kinds of experiences for the first time, imagine them being shared aloud. That's how they were meant to be told. If they unsettle you, pass them on. Share them with friends or family who like scary stories. That's the only way they keep living. Back in 2019, I started my freshman year at Queens College in New York City. I'm a senior now, and when I look back, those years feel like a mix of good memories and things I'd rather forget. I was nervous but excited to start film studies. I'm from Chicago, so I only went home for breaks. Most of the year, campus was my world. Orientation day was rough at first. I worried I wouldn't make any friends. But by the end of the day, I'd found a small group of people in my program I clicked with. And then there was Dylan. He stood out, but not in a good way. He had this odd energy, always rambling about obscure films no one had heard of, or making jokes that never landed. At first, I chalked it up to social awkwardness. But as weeks passed, he started to feel off. He'd insert himself into conversations uninvited, talk loudly about bizarre topics, and hover around even when no one wanted him there. Our friend group tolerated him out of politeness, but none of us truly liked him. Then one evening at dinner, my friend Mary Kate brought up something that changed how we saw him. "Did you hear about Dylan?" she asked. We shook our heads. A couple of girls said he's been following them back to their dorms. They're freaked out. My stomach dropped. It didn't surprise me as much as it should have. It just made everything real. After that, I started keeping my distance. I avoided him when I could. He still showed up, drifting into our group like nothing was wrong. One afternoon at lunch, he slid into an empty chair at our table without asking. His usual nonsense talk eventually shifted. "Why does everyone look at me like I'm a freak?" he demanded. "What's their problem?" I tried to ignore him, but he wouldn't let it go. Finally, I snapped. "Maybe because you don't respect people's boundaries, Dylan. Not everything has to be about you." His face twisted with anger. He didn't say a word. He just stood up and stormed off. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Thanksgiving break came and I flew back home to Chicago. My parents were happy to have me home, and I spent my time catching up on sleep, relaxing, just being a kid again. One night around 9:30 p.m., I was in my bedroom scrolling through my phone when I heard a knock on my window. My room was on the ground floor, but no one had ever knocked on my window before. I thought maybe it was a prank. Curiosity got the best of me. I pulled back the curtain and froze. Dylan was standing outside, illuminated by the faint orange glow of the streetlights. My heart slammed against my ribs. How did he know where I lived? What was he doing here in another state? I let the curtain drop and stumbled backward, panic surging. My parents were in the living room, so I ran. "Mom, Dad, Dylan's outside my window," I blurted. "Who?" my dad asked, frowning. "A guy from school. He's weird. He's been making people uncomfortable." My mom got up immediately. "Let's check." We went back to my room. She peeked out the window. "There's no one here," she said calmly. "He was right there," I insisted, voice shaking. My dad sighed. "You're probably just stressed, it's late, try to get some rest." I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew they didn't believe me. The next few days were tense. Every time I passed a window or stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that it was just someone who looked like him. Deep down, I knew better. When I got back to school, Dylan was nowhere to be found. He stopped showing up to class. Rumors swirled that he'd been expelled for harassing students. I was relieved, but not fully. One night, I stayed late at the library to finish a project. As I walked back to my dorm, that prickling feeling of being followed crept up my spine. I glanced back. A figure walked in the distance behind me. It was too dark to tell who it was, but every instinct screamed at me to hurry. I sped up, my heart pounding, and didn't look back again until I was in the safety of my dorm building. Over the next weeks, strange little things kept happening. A notebook I was sure I'd left in my room turned up in my backpack. My dorm key vanished for a full day, only to reappear neatly on my desk. I couldn't prove anything, but I felt his presence in every misplaced object. One evening, I got back to my door and found a note taped to it. The handwriting was shaky and almost illegible, but I recognized the name at the bottom. Dylan. The note read, "You don't get to ignore me. We're not finished." Fear curdled into anger. I took the note straight to campus security and told them everything, from the rumors to the stalking, to him showing up at my house in Chicago. They said they'd investigate and urged me to be careful. Lock doors. Don't walk alone at night. Call if anything happened. That night I heard footsteps outside my window again. This time I didn't look. I called campus security immediately. They arrived within minutes, but whoever had been out there was gone. They did, however, find fresh footprints in the snow just beneath my window, leading away into the darkness. After that, the signs stopped. No more notes, no more footsteps, no more sightings. Dylan vanished from my life as abruptly as he'd crashed into it. I never found out what happened to him, but the experience changed me. I started double-checking locks, avoiding walking alone, and being very careful about who I shared personal information with. He's gone, but the way he made me feel, exposed, watched unsafe, never fully left. I'll never forget my first job. I was a high school senior, eager to make some extra cash over the summer, when I landed a position at a small, cozy movie theater near my neighborhood. The pay was decent, it was close to home, and the poster said no experience required. It sounded perfect. The manager, Mr. Reynolds, had this quiet, intense presence. During my first shift, he laid out the rules. Clean the counters and seats, take out the trash, restock concessions, help your coworker with tickets, he said. Then he paused. And one more thing, don't linger after 2 a.m. Lock up and leave immediately. No exceptions. His tone was so serious it almost sounded like a warning, but I was too excited to question it. The first month was uneventful. My coworker Alexa was friendly but reserved. We cleaned, sold tickets, restocked candy. Simple. The pay was better than I'd expected, but as I settled into the routine, I noticed little things. On certain nights, especially weekends, Alexa seemed on edge. She moved quickly, insisting we close up by 1:30 a.m. at the latest. One night, I overheard her and Mr. Reynolds in a low, tense conversation. When I asked what it was about, she gave me a tight smile. Nothing important, just make sure you lock up fast, okay? Her words didn't match her face. It all came to a head on a quiet Friday night. Alexa had to leave early, leaving me to close up alone. I didn't mind. The theater was empty, the last show long over, and the silence was almost peaceful. Almost. I was wiping down the concession counter when I glanced at the glass display case and saw something behind me in the reflection. At first, I thought it was a smudge. Then it moved. A faint, human-shaped figure stood at the far end of the lobby, cloaked in shadow, unmoving. My heart lurched. I spun around. Nothing, just the empty lobby. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. Still, my hands shook a little as I finished cleaning. I locked the front doors and carried a bag of trash out to the dumpster behind the building. The parking lot was almost completely silent. The streetlights flickered, casting weak pools of yellow on the cracked asphalt. As I neared the dumpster, I heard it, soft footsteps behind me. I froze. The footsteps stopped. I turned slowly, scanning the lot. No one. Out of the corner of my eye, something moved. A shadow slipped behind the side wall of the theater. Adrenaline surged. I dropped the trash bag and ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it. I looked through the glass doors. The figure was there again, just outside, staring in. Its face was covered by some kind of mask. It didn't move, just watched. The next day, I went straight to Mr. Reynolds and told him everything. "You probably imagined it," he said, voice flat. "No, I didn't," I insisted. "There was someone outside, wearing a mask." His jaw clenched. "Stay focused on your tasks. Lock up on time, that's all I'm going to say." Unsatisfied, I turned to Alexa. This time when I asked, she didn't brush me off. "This place is weird," she admitted quietly. "I've seen things too, shadows, heard whispers, footsteps when no one's here. That's why I never stay late." My skin prickled. "Then why are we still working here? Why doesn't anyone do anything?" She shook her head. "Mr. Reynolds won't talk about it, but I heard rumors about a man who used to work here years ago. People say he was disturbed, obsessed with the late-night screenings. One night, he snapped and attacked a coworker. He wore a mask so they wouldn't recognize him, but they caught him. Some say his spirit never left." The thought lodged in my brain and wouldn't leave. The following Saturday, Alexa called in sick. I was alone again. I told myself I'd just close quickly and get out. But that night, the theater felt different. Heavy, charged. Every creak of the floor, every hum from the projectors made my nerves jump. In the last theater room, I was sweeping between the rows when the lights flickered and went out. The emergency lights didn't come on. My broom stilled in my hand. Then I heard them, slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the aisle behind me. "Alexa," I called, even though I knew she wasn't there. No answer. My heart slammed against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept the beam across the seats. Near the back, the light skimmed over a shape. A figure stood just outside the edge of the glow, head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was wearing a mask. I dropped my phone. It clattered against the floor and the light spun wild. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby. I looked toward the front doors. They were locked, but outside, under the flickering streetlights, the same masked silhouette stood facing the glass. Then, from Theater 1, the projector roared to life on its own. Light spilled through the open doorway. A movie began to play. At first, just static. Then, distorted footage of the theater itself. On the screen, I saw myself cleaning the lobby. The timestamp was from earlier that night. The footage jumped. Now I was in the theater, sweeping between the rows. Then it changed again. Behind me in the recording stood the masked figure, so close I should have felt its breath. A whisper brushed the back of my neck. "You're late." I screamed and bolted for the emergency exit. The door wouldn't budge at first, like something was holding it shut. "Time's up," the voice hissed, closer this time. In blind panic, I slammed my shoulder into the door. It flew open. I stumbled into the parking lot and ran, tears blurring my vision, not stopping until the theater was far behind me. I quit the next morning. I ignored all of Mr. Reynolds' calls. Alexa texted, asking what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. Over time, I heard rumors about strange accidents during late shifts, employees who didn't come back after closing. I don't know what haunts that place. Whether it's the masked man they say once worked there or something worse. I just know I'll never set foot in that theater again. I never imagined my dog Rocky would be the one to save my life. Rocky is a German shepherd, all brown fur and sharp black markings, with a big, fluffy tail. Loyal, protective, goofy. I always thought of him as just my sweet companion. Until one night proved he was a lot more than that. It was late November, and the nights had turned bitterly cold. I live alone in a small house on the edge of the woods. It's peaceful, far from the city noise, but the silence can feel eerie when the wind picks up. That night, I was on the couch wrapped in a blanket, a mug of tea in my hands. Rocky lay near the front door, head resting on his paws, half asleep. After a long day, I was ready to go to bed. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, making the house creak. It was louder than usual, but I tried to shrug it off. As I got up to turn off the lights, Rocky suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood straight up, muscles tensing. He stared at the door like he was seeing through it. "What is it, boy?" I asked, not really expecting anything. He didn't move. A low growl rumbled in his chest. My heart rate picked up. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the wind. Living near the woods, I was used to deer, foxes, and other animals wandering close. But Rocky didn't react like this to wildlife. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside a little. The yard looked empty. The trees swayed in the moonlight, shadows shifting. I breathed out slowly and turned back toward Rocky. "See, there's nothing." Before I could finish, he sprang up, barking sharply. He bolted to the door so fast his nails scraped the wood. My stomach twisted. I couldn't see anything, but his behavior screamed danger. I grabbed my phone. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, the crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside. My hands shook as I dialed the emergency number. I told the dispatcher there was someone outside my house and that my dog was going crazy. She told me officers were on their way and to stay on the line. I backed away from the door, gripping the phone tightly. Rocky stayed pressed against it, growling, teeth bared, tail stiff. Then came a loud impact. Not a knock, but a hard, deliberate blow. The wood splintered. Rocky erupted, barking so fiercely it echoed through the whole house. He threw his full weight against the door as if he could hold it shut himself. Another hit, more cracking wood. "Get away from the door," I shouted, though I knew whoever was out there couldn't hear me over Rocky's barking. I retreated into the living room, eyes darting for anything I could use as a weapon. My gaze landed on the fireplace poker. I grabbed it with both hands. The door burst inward with a crash, pieces of the frame flying. A man stepped in, dark clothes, a mask hiding his face. Tall, broad-shouldered. I froze. Rocky didn't. With a vicious snarl, he launched himself at the intruder. He hit the man like a bullet, jaws clamping onto his forearm. The man screamed a raw animal sound as Rocky shook his arm violently. For a second I stood there in shock. Then my voice returned. "Get out," I screamed. Rocky held on, his teeth sinking deeper. Blood soaked the man's sleeve. Even through the mask, I could see his panic. He finally managed to shove Rocky off, stumbling backward toward the open doorway. Clutching his arm, he bolted into the night. Rocky chased him to the edge of the yard, barking non-stop, before stopping and trotting back, chest heaving. I collapsed to the floor, shaking. Rocky's fur and mouth were streaked with blood, but he didn't seem hurt. He sniffed my face, tail wagging like he'd just done something ordinary. "You're such a good boy," I kept repeating, tears streaming down my face. "You're such a good boy." The police arrived shortly after. They took my statement and inspected the ruined door. One officer knelt to scratch Rocky's head and called him a hero. They told me the intruder had probably been watching the house, waiting for a moment when I seemed vulnerable. That thought still makes my skin crawl. I didn't sleep that night. All I could think about was what might have happened if Rocky hadn't been there. Now, every time I pass the repaired doorway, a small tremor of fear goes through me. But then I see Rocky stretched out by the fireplace, eyes quietly tracking my every move. He isn't just a pet, he's my protector. Rocky saved my life and I will never forget it. This next story took place last Christmas break. I have a wonderful family, a loving husband and 4 amazing kids, and we live in London. That year, my siblings and parents were joining us for the holidays, and we decided to spend Christmas somewhere different. We chose Greenland. Snowy landscapes, quiet, remote. It felt like the perfect escape from the city. We had no idea how wrong we were. On December 23rd, we caught a late-night flight and landed close to 11 p.m. The trip was long but uneventful. We picked up a rental car and drove about 10 minutes to a cozy chalet tucked among snowy hills. The house was quaint and peaceful. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I passed out. The next day was perfect. We explored the area, marveled at the frozen scenery, and enjoyed time with each other. By that evening, I was convinced it would be one of the best Christmases we'd ever had. The morning of Christmas Day started beautifully. The kids tore open presents in the living room, laughter filling the house. We had a big breakfast, everyone talking at once. By noon, we all climbed into the car and drove to a nearby mountain for a short hike. The trail was breathtaking, frosted trees, glittering snow, crisp air. About 15 minutes in, we stopped to take photos. Everyone was smiling, cheeks flushed from the cold. Then they appeared. 3 men stepped out from between the trees ahead of us, faces hidden behind black ski masks. One carried a knife. The other 2 had small pistols. "Don't scream, don't run," the tallest one said, his voice flat and cold. The children instinctively moved closer to my husband and me. My chest tightened. We were completely alone in a white, empty wilderness. "Give us everything you have," another one barked, waving his gun. My siblings and I scrambled to obey. We handed over phones, wallets, watches, anything we had on us. The men emptied our bags methodically, stuffing our belongings into a backpack. The shortest man, jittery and impatient, rifled through our things and scowled. "That's it. This is all you've got. Please," I said, my voice shaking. "We don't have anything else, just take it and go." He glared but said nothing. After what felt like forever, they began backing away. For a split second, I thought it was over. Then, without warning, the short man lunged forward and grabbed my youngest son, Liam. He was 6. "No. Stop," I screamed, reaching for him, but the tall man shoved me back hard. "We need leverage," the short one said, "in case they report us." "Let him go," my husband shouted, stepping forward. The man with the gun raised it, pointing it directly at my husband. "Stay back or he's done." Time seemed to freeze. Liam's panicked cries tore through the air as the men dragged him into the trees. My siblings held me as I thrashed and screamed, desperate to run after them. We watched, helpless, as they disappeared into the forest with my son. The second we could move, we sprinted back to the car. My husband drove us to the nearest police station, hands shaking on the wheel. We stumbled inside, crying and shouting, trying to explain through sobs. We reported the robbery and the kidnapping. The officers listened, took notes, and assured us they would do everything they could. Their eyes told a different story. Out there in that vast frozen emptiness, our chances were slim. That night, none of us slept. Every gust of wind outside the chalet sounded like footsteps. Guilt and terror sat heavy in my chest. The next morning, we cut our trip short and flew back to London. Christmas had come and gone, but all I could think about was Liam, somewhere out there, or maybe nowhere at all. In the weeks that followed, we worked closely with the authorities. There were searches, calls, leads that went nowhere. The men disappeared without a trace. No ransom calls, no sightings, nothing. Weeks turned into months. Every phone call from the police sent my heart racing, but the news was always the same. No progress. I took a leave from work. I couldn't function, couldn't focus on anything but the yawning emptiness where my son should have been. Our home changed. The other kids became quieter, their laughter replaced by whispers and careful glances. My husband and I tried to support each other, but we were both drowning in our own guilt and grief. Liam's fate is still unknown. The men were never caught. The trail went cold and stayed that way. Every Christmas since, no matter how we try to move forward, is a painful reminder of that day in Greenland and the little boy who never came home. This next story happened in 2017, when my friend Eric and I took a weekend trip to Texas. We were bored and looking for something to do. Eric, being the adventurous one, started searching for weird local spots. "Hey," he said, eyes lighting up, "there's an abandoned mental hospital on the edge of town. People say it's haunted. Want to check it out?" I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I also didn't want to be called a coward, and it was still daylight. What could really happen? The hospital looked like it had been ripped straight out of a horror movie. A huge, crumbling building with broken windows and graffiti everywhere. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. The whole structure creaked and groaned. "Looks like it'll fall on us," I joked, kicking a piece of rubble. Eric just laughed and pushed through the door. I followed, though unease settled in my stomach. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, smelling of mold and something metallic. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows in thin beams, but it didn't make the place feel any safer. A long hallway stretched in front of us, lined with doors. Most were closed. Some were cracked open like they were waiting. Faded posters clung to the walls, their images too worn to recognize. Scribbles and symbols were spray-painted everywhere. We wandered around, poking into empty rooms filled with broken furniture and peeling paint. It was creepy, but nothing actually happened. Eric kept cracking jokes, knocking on walls like he expected a ghost to answer. Then we found that room. It was near the end of the hallway, behind a heavy steel door that was slightly ajar. Eric pushed it open. The hinges screamed. Inside, the room was almost bare. A few old chairs, a table. The walls were marked with strange black symbols. The air felt colder in there, like we'd stepped into a different building. We walked in. That's when we heard it, children laughing. It was faint at first, like it was far away. Then it grew louder, echoing around us until it felt like the laughter was circling the room. Eric froze for a second. My heart started beating way too fast. "Kids," he muttered, rolling his eyes, trying to sound unfazed. "They're probably outside messing with us." A soft thud hit the wall, then another, like small rocks. "They're throwing rocks now," Eric said, annoyed. "Come on, let's go teach them a lesson." We stepped back into the hallway and followed the sounds. The laughter and faint impacts seemed to pull us toward the exit. When we pushed the front door open and walked into the overgrown yard, the sun made me squint. No one was there. We checked the yard, behind the bushes, near the trees. The place was empty. The laughter had stopped too. The silence felt wrong. "There's no way they ran off that fast," Eric said, frowning. "We were right behind them." "Maybe they're hiding," I offered, though even I didn't believe it. The space was too open. There weren't many places for anyone to hide. "Nice try," Eric yelled into the distance. "We're not scared." His voice echoed off the concrete. No answer. Then faintly from inside the building we heard it again. Children laughing. Eric and I locked eyes. For the first time he looked genuinely nervous. "This isn't funny anymore," he muttered. We went back inside anyway. The hallway felt different, heavier. The laughter cut off as soon as we crossed the threshold. When we reached the strange room, the steel door was now wide open. I was sure we'd left it only partly closed. Inside, the chairs and table were gone. Eric swore under his breath. "Let's just go. This place is messing with us." For once, I didn't argue. We walked fast down the hallway and out into the daylight, neither of us speaking until we reached the car. As we drove away, both of us kept glancing back at the building, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching us from the empty windows. When I was 8 years old, my world was small but full of wonder. Simple things felt magical to me. The crunch of snow under my boots, the way flakes glittered under the streetlights. One winter night, with fresh snow blanketing everything outside, something happened that I still can't explain. My dad had just tucked me in. He pulled the blanket up to my chin, patted my head, and told me to sleep tight. I nodded, but my mind was far from sleep. Through my thin curtains, I could see snow falling. I kept imagining how the yard must look, smooth, white, untouched. The heater hummed softly. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow rumbled by. I felt safe and warm. I waited until I heard my dad's footsteps fade down the hall and his bedroom door close. Then I kicked off my blanket and tiptoed to the window. I pulled the curtain aside and pressed my face against the cold glass. Outside, snow fell in thick, steady flakes, glowing under the streetlights. Our yard looked like a postcard, pure, smooth, with only a few tiny footprints leading toward the woods. Maybe a rabbit, maybe a fox. I stared for what felt like 5 minutes, just soaking in the quiet. Then out of nowhere, a loud bang came from my bedroom door. I gasped and spun around, my heart racing. I told myself it was just the house settling, or the heater, something normal. But when I looked at the door, my breath caught in my throat. Someone was standing in the doorway. At least I think it was someone. It was small, about as tall as I was, but everything about it was wrong. Its entire body was pitch black, not like a shadow or someone standing in dim light, but like it absorbed all the light around it. The hallway light behind it made its outline clear, but there were no features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a solid black shape. I froze. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was my own shadow somehow. Maybe my mom was playing a prank. But it was too short to be my dad, and my mom wouldn't just stand there in total silence. "Hello," I whispered. It didn't move. It didn't respond. It just stood there. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my throat felt tight, like my body decided making noise was the worst thing I could do. After a while, seconds, minutes, I don't know, I turned back to the window. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. Maybe I just couldn't stand to keep looking at it. Outside, the snow no longer looked peaceful. The yard looked cold and empty, like something was missing from the world. I stared out as long as I could stand it. Finally, I forced myself to glance back at the door. The black figure was gone. I ran to my bed, dove under the covers, and pulled them over my head. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stayed like that the rest of the night, too scared to move. In the morning, I told my parents what I'd seen. They exchanged a look. "It was probably just a dream," my mom said, patting my hand. "Or maybe you saw your shadow," my dad added. "The hallway light can make it look strange sometimes." I nodded, but inside I knew they were wrong. I hadn't been dreaming. I'd been wide awake, staring at the snow. And whatever I'd seen in the doorway wasn't my shadow. I never saw it again. But on winter nights when the snow is falling and the house is extra quiet, I still think about it. About how it just stood there. About how it didn't do anything. Sometimes I wonder which is worse, something that attacks you or something that only watches. I don't know what it was or why it came. I only know one thing. I never look out my bedroom window at night anymore.